talk about the mistakes, some of the absurd mistakes that people make in the gym. And I can talk about it, but it's always better to illustrate them. But every time I try and bring up a video of the foolish things that people in the gym, I lose this broadcast. So I had to make a choice between talking about what I think is important for all of everybody to understand and what is entertaining. So tonight I choose information. Perhaps if I can get some advice of how to bring up these videos about the foolish things that people and dangerous things that people do in the gym, we might do that at another time. But tonight, I'd like to talk about intensity. The reason I chose this evening was that for a couple of reasons, actually. The interpretation of what is commonly referred to as HIT training. You hear this term a lot, high intensity training. And the definition has changed over the years. In the past, high intensity training referred to the amount of resistance you used for your designated sets and repetitions. And this was usually determined by conducting a test of your contractile capacity, primarily with one of the three, what they call big lifts, and that's squat, bench press, and deadlift. Now, I know all of you out there don't employ all of those lifts in your training. As a matter of fact, weight training has, while the World Health Organization has designated as equal, if not more important than aerobic conditioning, still, in terms of longevity and personal health, aerobic conditioning is the primary focus of this broadcast and what we all should do as we age and our circumstances change, whether they are, lifestyle changes, lifestyle choices that we make in terms of where we live, how we live, how we eat, what we eat, and whether we choose to exercise or not. And if we do choose to exercise, what is the priority? What exercises should we prioritize? And what is the length, time, intensity that we should use while we're pursuing our particular objective? The second reason I want to talk about this was I was training a young man the other day, and he asked me, is lifting heavy weights, for example, powerlifting, like, as I just mentioned, bench press, squat, or deadlift, is that more beneficial in the long run, or is bodybuilding more beneficial in the long run in terms of general health? Well, when you talk about these things, you have to pin down the title and the subject, because depending on many factors, your body type, your disposition, whether you enjoy lifting very heavy weights or you enjoy lifting relatively light weights for a great many repetitions. And it depends on what you are conditioning yourself for. So I will precurse this intensity discussion by first discussing the need to create an objective before you begin your training. In many cases, health and fitness is not the objective. It's the means of obtaining an objective. Although certainly health and fitness per se can be a fine objective. But normally, once you achieve a standard of reasonable health and you're reasonably fit, if your objective is not clear-cut, you tend to lose sight of what you're after, or if you had it in the first place. So in general, when people are training, before they begin, they create an objective, a target, and you move towards that target in terms of conditioning and diet and lifestyle, and you eliminate things that will hold you back from achieving that particular objective. Smoking, drinking, things that are intrinsically bad for you, and yet you may still indulge. So along those lines, we all have to make decisions where we stand and where we want to go. And then we can talk about how we choose to arrive at that particular point, what methodology we employ, and what level of commitment we're willing to make. And it's not easy. I say that right away because commitment to a regular exercise regimen is something that you would be surprised how many people do not follow it as a lifelong commitment. It's usually, and this comes from 50 years of teaching, for a person to adopt a lifelong commitment to exercise and physical excellence, people are few and far between. I'd have to say less than 10%. Normally is a bad word. In many cases, life interferes. Work, personal problems, moving, the COVID virus prevent us from pursuing these objectives. And of course, then inactivity becomes the norm. And that's what you're used to. So you don't really get motivated to change that norm. All peoples are very, very happy with the status quo. And to change the status quo takes a great deal of, well, let's face it, I think it takes courage to give up something that is very comfortable and move to something that perhaps is not initially particularly comfortable or fun or interesting in order to achieve a different level of personal excellence is not in everybody's ballpark. Let's put it that way. So, as I think I've said on this broadcast before you start a program, an exercise program, you must keep three things in mind. Is your program effective for your objective, which I assume you've already established? Is it efficient in terms of the time and energy you devote to pursuing this objective? And is it safe? Which is, the safety factor is one thing I wanted to show you tonight, where people do unbelievably foolish things in the gym for whatever purposes. It's not simply that they don't know. It is attempting to make something that is inherently not particularly interesting to them, to make it more interesting and more fun. And in the process, do things that place themselves at very, very high risk. So, assuming that you've decided what your objective is, and keeping in mind those three guidelines: safe, effective, efficient. And then you decide how do I achieve that? And the second decision you'll have to make is, what methodology helps me the most? So you prioritize what you want. Is it resistance training? Is that what contributes primarily to your achieving your objective? Or is it aerobic conditioning? For example, marathon running, those type of aerobic activities. Or is it an activity that requires more flexibility? So normally in a fitness program, again, I use that word normally. When you're after fitness, most authorities, the World Health Organization, American College of Sports Medicine, agree that aerobic conditioning should be your primary training methodology. How much you wish to do, again, depends on what kind of time commitment you have and the level of your objective. For example, if you want to run 5 kilometers, that doesn't take a great deal of time and effort. 20 minutes to 30 minutes of light jogging every other day for a month will get you where you want to go. But if you want to run a full marathon, that's going to take time. From the beginning, in the past, I would train people for a full year before they were comfortable attempting to run 42 kilometers or 26 miles. Here in Japan, I deal primarily in kilometers, so I'm more comfortable with that now after the time I've spent here. So 42 kilometers is 42,000 meters. That means you place your foot 21,000 times over a period of 3 to 4 to 5 hours. And not even including the marathon per se, but the preparatory process. Again, thousands and thousands of times, and the wear and tear is many people who are not prepared wind up with serious problems. So, but aerobic conditioning in general is the optimum, I believe, the optimum way to achieve a healthy body. And when we talk about health, we talk about avoidance of sickness. So things like obesity, high blood pressure, diabetes, atherosclerosis, stroke, heart attacks, those kinds of things. Weight training, except for the obesity factor, for all of those things, weight training may play a role, but compared to aerobic conditioning, the role is not major. It's a minor role. With obesity, and I think we covered this in a previous chapter, weight training, resistance training changes your body composition, so your metabolism, even at rest, works harder. You burn more calories at rest, and so the chance of you burning more calories over a 24-hour period, if you weight train, is higher than if you run for 20 or 30 minutes, because your metabolism is only stimulated for the time you are running, and after you stop your run for about 30 minutes, perhaps. But weight training, when you enhance your musculature, that's a 24-hour effect that you are indulging in, and that will facilitate weight loss. But I digress, and I always digress. I don't want to digress too much on weight loss, unless it's primarily facilitated by diet. At any rate, exercise without considering a dietary aspect of it will result in very, very little weight loss, if any. So, let's get back to the major topic of the night, which is intensity. The interpretation of intensity has changed. A lot of research has been done, and you hear about HIT training, high intensity training. The first time I came in touch with HIT training was when I was in the United States, talking with the strength trainer of the Cincinnati Bengals football team. And not only was he the trainer of the football team, but he chose the equipment. And at that time, Nautilus was a predominant equipment of choice for professional athletic teams in the United States. So we're talking, 30 or 40 years ago. The Nautilus line of equipment is very effective, and the person who developed it, Arthur Jones, was an engineer, and he pioneered a lot of the concept that we see in gyms today. It's in the equipment in gym. His son developed the Hammer Strength line of equipment, and we were going to market that in Japan. It's an excellent line of equipment. I fully recommend it. It effectively bridges the gap between machines and free weights. At any rate, the advisor, if you will, the exercise physiologist that was on record with the Nautilus line and the Hammer line of equipment was a gentleman by the name of Darden, and he advocated high-intensity training being you would set up a series of like 8 or 10 machines, and you would do one set until exhaustion on each machine, and then immediately go to the next machine. And his interpretation of that was high repetitions with medium weight with no rest in between sets. And that idea and that methodology expanded became, amongst athletes, the primary way to condition. Well, you have to understand that athletes are a special group of people, especially professional athletes. You've normally been training with every conceivable methodology since the time they were children. American professional football players in the United States, professional football begins at 5 years old with what they call Pop Warner football practice. So as soon as children reach 15, essentially puberty, and muscles can be enhanced, they move to more serious training methodologies. And from 15 to 22, your primary developmental years, they pack on a lot of muscle and lean body mass. So when they become professional, they cannot train like they did when they were in high school and college because the demands of a professional player are much higher. So they want to train to maintain their muscular conditioning and to maintain their efficiency, if you will, on the playing field. And that's fine. Well, people kind of latched onto this and they said, well, if this is good for a professional football player, it must be good for me too. Well, yes and no. So at that point in time, high intensity training was doing high repetitions, one set, and that changed to 3 to 4 sets. Minimum rest in between sets, and essentially working to almost failure. And in many cases, very slow, you conduct the exercise very slowly. I don't want to get too technical here, but basically you raise the weight for 1 unit of time and you lower the weight for 3 to 4 units of that same time period. So if you move the bar, you conduct the exercise for, say, 5 seconds, it takes you 10 seconds to lower the weight. And that negative resistance is what promotes muscular hypertrophy. So it is essentially what bodybuilders use. But the caveat is, how much resistance are you using for those very slow repetitions, very high repetitions with minimum rest? Well, we have to talk about what they call specific adaptation. So if you train slowly with light weight and if you train to exhaustion, you will improve hypertrophy. Yes. Will your strength improve? That's another point. That's a debatable point. Relatively, your strength will improve compared to somebody who doesn't do anything. But compared to an athlete who does strength training only, you will not arrive at that particular level of development. You will probably get large muscles, but not necessarily as strong as somebody devoted to only the strength training parameters. And strength training parameters are assessing your single repetition maximum, or you can go a variation of that, how many times you can lift the bar for 2 times or 5 times. And then you take a percentage of that resistance, which you've done for, say, 1 repetition. So, and then you do that for 6 to 8 repetitions for strength, 10 to 12 for hypertrophy, 12 to 15 for muscular stamina, or power, 3 to 5 repetitions. So what I'm attempting to say is that intensity, from my viewpoint, is how much resistance are you using for the exercises for your prescribed repetitions and sets. This is a point of debate amongst exercise physiologists and have always been. Exercise physiology, even though the science is exact, does it apply to this particular individual or not? So you will see a great many programs on the internet. Many people will suggest doing this type of training or this type of training to enhance your general conditioning. the point is, does that apply to you or not? So let me give you the clear guidelines to exercise intensity and what you can expect. If you do not perform a single repetition maximum, your judgment is somewhat subjective. And that's okay. That's not a problem. When you are a beginner, normally 2 to 4 sets of around 10 repetitions with a prescribed exercise for each body part will contribute to your overall fitness. Keep in mind that fitness is more about aerobic conditioning, so a general muscular developmental program is fine. It's fine because the real work, the real concern should be in how your heart and lungs and circulatory system is working. So let's put that aside and say here you have your average individual, reasonably healthy, no fitness difficulties, meaning the woman or the man is not excessively obese, may have a little bit of adipose tissue, but is not used to exercising on a regular basis. So the guideline is you begin with twice a week. And the reason you do twice a week is because the deconditioning phase sets in after about 5 days of rest. You need 2 days for recovery, but 5 days, the body says, well, I don't need to maintain this body mass. And it doesn't. And so you enter in a phase of gradual diminishment of muscular strength and size because the body doesn't want to sustain something that's not being utilized. So 2 days a week, 3 to 4 sets, around 10 repetitions for legs, waist, chest, shoulders, arms, neck, and you'll be fine. And then go out and run, essentially. So, but if you're interested in a little bit more than that, and suppose you want to build strength, which is a good idea. If you choose to go into a muscular development phase, that's okay. But I would firmly suggest that you develop strength that allows you to use a sufficient level of resistance to really efficiently affect development of your muscularity. So I would recommend drop the repetitions to around 8 repetitions and start to move into more multi-muscle movements. So always include squats and deadlifts and bench presses. And those are the 3 primary. Bench presses work every pushing muscle in the upper body, shoulders, chest, triceps. Squats, lower body, hips, core, basic all-around exercise, extremely. Deadlifts, again, all the pulling muscles, biceps, back, trapezius, all the muscles in your body that involved in pulling. So those are the 3 major ones. And then you get into more secondary exercises, more isolated exercises. So instead of working just the bench press, you want to work the shoulders separately. So you do presses or lateral raises. And you want to work the triceps separately. So you do push downs or kickbacks. These exercises will enhance all the pushing muscles. So, but let's not go there right just yet. So you've created a base. And then you graduated into developing strength. And now you want to move on into more expanded development. Let's put it that way. You want more muscle size. Then you have to try and maintain pretty close to the weights that you used, the resistance you used at the 8 repetition modality, and move that into the 10 to 12 repetition modality. And that will give you enhanced muscle mass, what they call hypertrophy. So if you stay in the strength modality, you will not develop as much hypertrophy as the person who has moved on to the hypertrophy modality. Exercise physiology is relative. If you are involved in one particular training modality, you get strong in that modality and primarily in that modality. So if you're training for hypertrophy, you will get hypertrophy, but you will not get as much strength as a person who's training only for strength. And the person who's training for strength and or hypertrophy will not develop the same level of stamina as a person who is working in the 12 to 15 repetition range. So these are the things you have to consider. And you put these in perspective to how do they facilitate my objective. Now, all people will benefit from this bit of information, but not all people can do this. So you're not sure, and perhaps your objective changes, and perhaps your time changes. So then you say, well, if that's the case, why don't I do a more general workout? And you drop back into the 10 repetition, which is probably not sufficient. As long as you maintain working with relatively heavy resistance, you will develop muscle mass and you will develop strength. And that relatively heavy means that you can lift whatever exercise you do, you lift it between 8 and 12 repetitions, depending on the amount of resistance you use. And you do that for 4 sets. And you do that twice a week. And you will develop. Now, what is the difference between people who go into bodybuilding and people who do powerlifting? Well, powerlifting being the 3 major lifts: squat, deadlift, and bench press. So power training is relatively low reps with very, very heavy weight. And you determine that weight by, as I mentioned before, seeing how much you can do in each one of those lifts, 1 repetition. And then you take between 75 and 85% of that figure and you do it for the prescribed 6 to 8 repetitions for 4 sets. And you will develop strength. And that's what I have always thought intensity was. A percentage of your single repetition maximum. Well, then you go into the bodybuilding mentality, which is basically a relatively lightweight relative to the power pursuer. And you do that for 3 to 4 sets for very high repetitions or until failure, as many as possible. And you do very little rest between sets. Now, doing very little rest between sets is one interpretation of intensity. And working with a weight that is a percentage of your single repetition maximum is another interpretation of intensity. So rest assured that those differences are significant. Significant in what you should do to achieve what objective, and you have to decide which one is more appropriate for your body type, for your emotional state of mind. I mean, some people just don't like to do high repetitions. People like to lift heavy weights. And so to answer the question of the person who asked me which is better for you long term, I would have to say light weights, light resistance, not a percentage of single repetition maximum. Because although the single repetition maximum modality is very, very attractive, lifting very heavy weights is very satisfying. And it contributes a lot to your self-esteem, and it contributes a lot to whatever athletic pursuit you're involved in. But the wear and tear on your joints will eventually catch up to you. Squats and bench press especially are compression exercises. The joint is compressed while you're performing the exercise. And so what happens is the cartilage covering the bone and between the bones gradually, I mean, there's no way to put it nicely. You grind away the cartilage in your joints. bench presses, shoulders, elbows. I have been very fortunate that I am as old as I am, and I've had very little of that type of shoulder difficulty. The knees, my knees on the end after doing very, very heavy squats for a long, long time, and running marathons and teaching aerobics and doing judo. I'm afraid that my knees have given up the ghost. They've decided, no, we're not going to take this anymore. So they basically kind of, although I still exercise my legs and my knees, so the discomfort is not excessive, but it's there. And you can maintain a tremendous level of, a surprising level of fitness and muscular size and strength well into your 70s and 80s. You would be surprised. But if you continue to lift very heavy weights, your joints will suffer. Keep that in mind. Runners as well. This applies to you just like it applies to powerlifters. If you continue to run, and especially if you are heavy and you continue to run, my line of demarcation, if you will, is if you weigh over 80 kilograms, that's about 180 pounds, don't run. Don't run. Period. Flat out. Don't run. There are many options. There's bicycling, there's swimming, there's a cross trainer. All of these are non-compression exercises that will give you all the aerobic conditioning you could possibly want. Running for anybody over 80 kilos, you have to consider the pounding your knees take. Way back in 1973 when Dr. Cooper wrote the book Aerobics and coined the phrase, and everybody got involved. He was called the father of aerobic conditioning. And it's true. His influence was significant. People started jogging. He was also called the father of arthroscopic surgery because the number of people that went through knee surgery in the succeeding 5 to 10 years were, well, let's just say that doctors were very happy with the opportunity to practice their skills. So, as we all get older, we have to accommodate father time, unfortunately. Metabolism tends to slow down if we don't exercise. Muscular strength diminishes if we don't exercise. Afflictions, joint afflictions, appear if we don't exercise or if we exercise too much. The one good thing is your heart, lung, circulatory system. You can maintain a very, very high level of maximum oxygen utilization well into your 70s and 80s if you continue to exercise in a way that does not damage your joints. So, again, I digress, but to answer my friend's suggestion, I would suggest that if you are over 35 years old, that you change from very, very heavy lifting to moderately heavy lifting. Maintain a proper form. Work through a complete range of motion when you do the exercise. And adopt a level of intensity that is more on minimizing the rest between sets than it is lifting heavy weights. If you shorten the rest between sets of doing exercise, you won't be able to handle the heavy weights anyways. Heavy weights require 2 or 3 minutes of rest between a very heavy lift to fully recuperate. But high intensity with relatively light weights, not the case. Not the case. You can wait 30 seconds and you won't experience some substantial fatigue. You'll be okay. So, that's the current the differences in the definition of high intensity. One is minimum time, and the other is maximum weight, maximum resistance. And professional bodybuilders that you see on the stage, keep in mind that they are chemically enhanced. And without a doubt, because they do handle significantly heavy weights, by the time they are 50, many of them are seriously have serious problems with their joints. Ronnie Coleman, who was Mr. Universe, Mr. Olympia, one of the largest, most well-proportioned men ever. I think he has 3 pins in his spine, has had I don't know how many operations on his knees and joints. That's not really what this is all about. This is exercise, and pursuing physical excellence is, in my book, a means of achieving an end, and the end being leading an aggressive, functioning life that allows you to pursue and explore your potential, and both physical and emotional and intellectually. And exercise on a regular basis will give you those benefits, without a doubt. And it's achieving more and more attention. Abstaining from excessive amounts of alcohol, sugar, to enhance your physical state is now being, it used to be suggested, and now it's almost demanded. If you want to stay healthy, you have to pay attention to these things, and especially as you get older. Again, father time is not particularly forgiving. So, one small but extremely important point in anybody who is training, whether it be aerobic conditioning or whether it be muscular conditioning, intensity is the key to achieving your objective. You have to decide which of those definitions apply to you and achieving your objectives. So I wish you luck. We didn't have a lot of participants today, but this will be recorded and archived. So hopefully if people get a chance, want to take a look at it, I hope this is helpful, and hope that I'll see you next Thursday. Thank you for tuning in. Good night.